time in the Biden Justice Department, while churches were being literally firebombed, while pregnancy care centers were being vandalized, they did nothing. The striking disparity is absolutely unconscionable. This is also an administration that recruited spies, recruited informants into Catholic parishes in this country, parishes that the last administration deemed to be suspect, whose theology they didn't like. They wanted to try to get informants in the parishes to work with the FBI to spy on America.
Welcome back to Freedom Forge. If you believe in truth, accountability, and standing up for the Constitution of the United States, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe right now, because what we're about to break down is something every American, no matter your background, needs to understand. Today's video is about a Senate hearing focused on a judicial nominee and a much bigger issue underneath it all: the power of government, the protection of the First Amendment, and serious allegations about how federal agencies may have treated people of faith in recent years. This hearing dives into questions about religious liberty, state power versus federal authority, and whether the justice system has been applied fairly and equally.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, congratulations again. It's nice to see you now in that chair. Look forward to seeing you behind the dais here sometime soon in the Eighth Circuit. Let me just ask you, you served as Chief of Staff and First Assistant to my predecessor in Missouri, now my colleague, Senator Schmidt. While you were in the AG's office, Missouri took on some of the most consequential state-level litigation in the country, I think it's fair to say. Vaccine mandates, big tech censorship, the landmark case against China that resulted in a $24 billion judgment. Can you just describe for us the role that you played in setting litigation strategy while you were in the office, and what those cases taught you about the relationship between state sovereignty and federal power?
We had a great team in the Attorney General's office led by the person who came after you, and now Senator Schmidt. In each of those cases you mentioned, in my role, I got to help line up the attorneys who would work on the case, work with them on strategy and arguments, review draft and final pleadings. In some of those cases you mentioned, I was the attorney of record when the case was filed, and then would help throughout the course of the litigation with whatever the team would need. We had some great attorneys in that office, and I was proud to be part of the team. And as it relates to the last part of your question on state sovereignty, the founders set up a very important vertical separation of powers that in which states play a key role, and that in the Attorney General's office, I learned how important the state sovereignty and the ability to represent those interests in that office can be.
I want to shift gears for just a second and talk about a report that was released yesterday by the Department of Justice on the incredible weaponization and targeting of persons of faith in this country, and pro-life Americans in particular. And I want to rehearse for you a catalog. I'm sorry to say it is a very sorry catalog of abuse of power perpetrated by the last administration at the highest levels of that administration, the FBI, the Department of Justice, all the way to the White House. The report that was released yesterday was based on a review of 700,000 internal records that detailed in striking detail, with striking specificity, I should say, how the Department of Justice under Joe Biden used the FACE Act to go after pro-life Americans. That is, they used pro-abortion groups. They brought cases that were tenuous at best in order to intimidate pro-lifers, people like Mark Houck, who was and is a law-abiding citizen who had the temerity to go and pray outside an abortion clinic, and for that crime, quote unquote, had a federal SWAT team show up at his door in the early hours of the morning, drag him out, handcuff him in front of his children who were screaming. They didn't know what they were going to do with their dad. A jury later acquitted him, thank goodness, on all charges. These are the same people who at the same time in the Biden Justice Department, while churches were being literally firebombed, while pregnancy care centers were being vandalized, they did nothing. The striking disparity is absolutely unconscionable. This is also an administration that recruited spies, recruited informants into Catholic parishes in this country, parishes that the last administration deemed to be suspect, whose theology they didn't like. They wanted to try to get informants in the parishes to work with the FBI to spy on American parishioners. This is the sort of thing that, frankly, is unheard of in American history, this deliberate targeting of people of faith. So here's my question to you. You will, if you are confirmed, soon be on the bench and have charge of enforcing in a fair and even-handed manner the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. Tell us about the importance of the First Amendment, about the importance of religious liberty, and the importance of this bedrock principle for the civil rights and political rights of all Americans, that your religious faith shouldn't make you an enemy of the state in this country. What are your views on this?
The First Amendment is the beating heart of the Constitution. It's incredibly important. The Free Exercise Clause and the freedom of speech, those core provisions to the Constitution that you were mentioning. I know this has been an issue that you have championed, Senator. I would point out that I was privileged to be co-counsel for Mr. Houck on a case that was filed after he was acquitted to try to compensate his family for the raid at his house, for pointing the long guns at his wife and children. There was a settlement that we just worked out earlier this year on that case to try to compensate for what had been done. And you're right, there were some terrible facts from that case, and we were grateful to have worked out a resolution for Mr. Houck in that case.
Let me just, in my remaining seconds here, see if we can establish, maybe you and I together can establish just a basic constitutional baseline. Should any American citizen be disfavored in law on the basis of their religious faith?
Absolutely not.
Should any American citizen be targeted by law enforcement on nothing more than the basis of their religious faith?
Yeah, and Senator, I don't want to prejudge any case, but I think the Supreme Court has said that viewpoint discrimination is not something that the government should ever do.
Is the federal government empowered and entitled to keep lists of churches that it theologically disagrees with, regards therefore as suspect, and use the federal law enforcement power to recruit spies, to recruit informants, or otherwise disfavor these religious organizations on nothing more than the basis of their theology? Can they do that under the Constitution?
Yeah, I think the Supreme Court has said time and time again that the federal government is not supposed to be discriminating against anyone for their religious views.
That's exactly correct. I mean, the answer to all those questions is no, no, no. And it is time that we had in this country the return to the rule of law and the protection of the First Amendment of the United States, the protection for people of faith in this country. Yesterday's report was an incredible, stunning wake-up call, should be. And I hope that part of the remedy to this and the incredible abuse that we have seen in the last 4 years, 5 years, will be people like you on the bench, Mr. Smith, who will apply our Constitution and the rule of law even-handedly, fairly, without fear or favor. I look forward to seeing you on that bench. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Smith, I'd like to walk through what I see.
Now, let's get into it. What you just heard in that exchange is not just another routine confirmation hearing. This is a window into a much deeper issue that goes right to the core of what America is supposed to be. One of the first things discussed was the nominee's experience in a state attorney general's office, where he worked on major cases involving vaccine mandates, big tech censorship, and even litigation against foreign governments. And let's be honest, those are not small issues. Those are battles over individual freedom, government overreach, and the limits of federal power. And this is where the concept of state sovereignty comes into play. The founders didn't design a system where all power flows from Washington. They created a balance. States are supposed to act as a check on federal authority. When the federal government oversteps, states step in. That's not a flaw in the system. That is the system. But then the hearing takes a turn, and this is where things get serious. The discussion shifts to a Department of Justice report detailing what's being described as the targeting of people of faith and pro-life Americans. Now, whether you agree with every claim or not, the principle at stake here is something every American should care about. Are we treating citizens equally under the law? Because what was described is deeply troubling. Allegations that law enforcement actions were taken in a way that appeared disproportionate, like early morning raids on individuals who were later acquitted. At the same time, claims that acts of violence against religious institutions or pregnancy centers didn't receive the same level of response. Now let's pause right there. If the government is applying the law unevenly, if one group is treated more harshly than another based on their beliefs, that is not justice. That is exactly what the Constitution is supposed to prevent. And then comes the part that should really get your attention. The idea that federal agencies may have attempted to place informants inside religious institutions. Think about that. Churches, places of worship, communities where people gather to practice their faith peacefully. That crosses a line. This country was founded on religious freedom, not tolerance, freedom. The First Amendment doesn't say you can practice your religion as long as the government approves of it. It says the government has no business interfering in it. And to his credit, the nominee made something very clear. The First Amendment is the beating heart of the Constitution. The government should not discriminate against anyone based on their religious views. That's not a political statement. That's a constitutional principle. And the senator pressed further with some very direct questions. Should any American be treated differently under the law because of their faith? The answer was no. Should law enforcement target someone simply because of their beliefs? Again, no. Should the government keep lists of religious groups it disagrees with and treat them as suspect? Absolutely not. These are basic questions, but the fact that they even need to be asked in a Senate hearing tells you something is off. And here's where I'm going to give you my perspective. This is bigger than politics. This is about whether the United States is still a country where your rights are protected regardless of who you are, what you believe, or how you vote. Because once you allow the government to pick and choose which beliefs are acceptable, you've opened the door to something dangerous. Today it might be one group. Tomorrow it could be another. That's why the First Amendment matters so much. It protects speech you agree with and speech you don't. It protects beliefs you share and beliefs you might strongly oppose. Because the moment those protections become selective, they stop being rights and start being privileges. And that's not what America is supposed to be. Now, let's also be fair. These are serious allegations. And in a country built on the rule of law, this should be examined carefully, with evidence, with transparency, and with accountability. No one should jump to conclusions, but no one should ignore these concerns either. Because trust in our institutions depends on fairness. It depends on consistency. It depends on the idea that justice is blind. And what this hearing shows is that a lot of Americans are starting to question whether that standard is still being upheld. That's why moments like this matter. That's why who sits on the bench matters. Judges are not supposed to be political actors. They're supposed to interpret the law, uphold the Constitution, and ensure that every American is treated equally under it. No favoritism, no bias, no fear, no pressure, just the law. And until we get back to that foundation completely, these debates are not going away. They're going to keep happening in hearings like this. They're going to keep coming up in courtrooms across the country. And they're going to keep raising the same fundamental question. Are we still living up to the principles this country was founded on? If you made it this far, make sure you like the video, subscribe to Freedom Forge, and stay informed, because we're going to keep breaking down the issues that matter, giving you clear analysis, and speaking on principles that should never be compromised. I'll see you in the next one.